So on the topic of transits that everyone experiences at midlife that initiates us into midlife, that sort of liminal phase between adulthood and eldership, between the two Saturn returns, we have this long period of that liminal phase between one place and the next. You're not fully here nor there. You're being initiated into a new phase of life. There are a clustering of astrological transits that happen in between those two sort of pillars of first Saturn return, second Saturn return. First Saturn return at 30, second Saturn return at 60. And the real initiation into that liminal space, that call to adventure, if you're referencing Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, the main event is Uranus opposition. And Uranus is the planet that corresponds to the archetype of liberation, of individuation. And as you know, Carl Jung describes the whole process of individuation as starting at midlife, right? So everyone experiences the Uranus opposition sometime in their early 40s, very late 30s, but into the early 40s. But I want to talk about not necessarily Uranus opposition as much as I want to talk about the fact that there is an overlap with another very important transit, and that is the Neptune square. Now, oppositions and squares are sort of aspects, astrological aspects that feel like there's a friction, like there is a challenge, that there is some difficulty, some growth involved. It's not just, something where you can kick back and relax and it feels all harmonious and you just slide into the next phase of life. So the mere fact that these are both like more sort of what we would call challenging transits means that, there is a reorientation, there is a change in direction, there is something that we've kind of built up over time, and the change in direction is going to feel disorienting or jarring in some sort of way. So, like I said, the main sort of astrological transit that really sort of initiates us into that liminal space is that Uranus opposition. And Uranus is the planet after Saturn in our solar system. So if you think of all of the visible planets, visible to the naked eye, we have Saturn as the very last one, and it sort of speaks to the idea of the known, the conscious realm, the physical realm, that which we can taste, touch, see, smell, right? And Saturn represents that sort of boundary line. And so Saturn also kind of correlates to the ego structures, right? It's kind of like a psychological structure that we sort of have inherited and built up over time, and has sort of like taken form at our first Saturn return at around age 30. That's when we get the job. That's when we probably get married. That's when we sort of like are initiated into adulthood. And that initiation sort of is as a result of a lot of societal input, right? Our ego is built up through that societal conditioning. And so, 30s, we're kind of moving through, we're adults now, right? We've done the responsible thing. We kind of feel like we know who we are, and we've built the thing that, we thought was the responsible thing to do, right? Whether it's the job, it's the marriage, it's whatever, right? Now, there are some other transits, very important transits, leading up to Uranus opposition, but we're not going to talk about that. But Uranus opposition now comes in like a lightning strike. Now, Uranus is kind of like that planet of disruptions, sudden change, liberation, but it's like this fast liberation process that we sort of undergo. It kind of hits us out of nowhere. So with Uranus opposition, we feel this sudden urge towards more authenticity, right? Where we kind of question the old structures that were built around age 30, and we feel the need to be liberated from anything that is not founded upon our authenticity, our true authentic self. Remember, there's a lot of input that goes into the building of the ego that sort of like crystallizes by the time we're 30. But then what happens with Uranus opposition is that we suddenly feel this urge towards authenticity. The things that we have been doing up till then that were just borrowed, knowledge from society feel insufferable. What feels authentic feels like the thing we are called towards. Now, there is an overlap between that Uranus opposition and the Neptune square. Now, let's think about Uranus. Uranus is further out than Saturn. All of the planets outside of Saturn in the solar system, past Saturn, represent these sort of like transpersonal energies that are not necessarily representative of our internal processes and our personalities, but they are sort of like processes that sort of happen to us at a certain point. And so now we're stepping out of the conditioned realm of who we are, Saturn, the boundary, that which is the furthest planet that is visible to the naked eye, and therefore, representative of what we can see with our eyes, what we can feel and touch with our senses and so forth. And now there's this disruptive sort of spiritual process, a trans-personal outside process that is happening to us at the liminal space, that threshold into midlife, right? But like I said, Uranus opposition does not happen in isolation. It overlaps with the Neptune square, and Neptune is the planet that is even further out from Uranus. So we can't see Uranus with the naked eye, nor can we see Neptune. These are forces that are sort of outside of us that are now kind of disrupting the status quo, Saturn, that we have built up over time in our earlier life. And now the foundations are being shaken to ask the question, is what you have built based upon your authenticity, who you are meant to be, who you incarnated into this life in order to embody? And so Uranus is shaking things up suddenly, but at the same time, Neptune is the archetype of disillusion of the ego, right? The ego, if the ego is Saturn, Neptune is here to dissolve the ego. Neptune is sort of also the planet that is correlates with spirituality and transcendence. Right? So what happens around the time of this liminal transition into midlife is that not only do we feel this sudden lightning bolt sort of propensity towards change and individuation, but we also feel the dissolution of the ego structures, the stories that we have inherited up till that point. And so the planetary sort of like transits are kind of working together. On the one hand, Neptune is starting to dissolve, right? Inherited spiritual beliefs, anything that is not passing the test of authentic lived experience, right? It's dissolving that egoic sort of story that motivated us to build the structures that we built at the first Saturn return. And in tandem with that, we have Uranus, the lightning strike of change, of freedom, individuation, also hitting us at the same time. So what I'm trying to show you here is that these outer planets are actually sort of like working together in order to disrupt the status quo that was established, that was inherited, the stories that were inherited, all of the things that were built around social conditioning, because the real life or the authentic you is what is trying to emerge in midlife. And this is why midlife feels like a crisis. Now, first of all, like I said, these aspects, oppositions and squares, they feel challenging, right? So in other words, you're not just going to coast through midlife. You're going to feel it as the disillusion of your ego. You might feel called towards things like more transcendent types of practices like meditation that also further sort of like feeds the process of that dissolution of ego. Things like meditation allow us to sort of connect to that transcendent, sort of larger aspect of us that is beyond the rings or the cage of Saturn, as we move out towards the wholeness of who we truly are and the more authentic expression of what we were meant to be.